I'm at Tyndale University College, and we're here for the Ravi Zacharias Summer School. And today I've got Alycia Wood, and she is an itinerant speaker with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. So welcome, Alycia. Great to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you're originally from Rochester, New York. A lot of our viewers can probably relate to that. You're now in Boston these days, where you sometimes ride the subway and hear them call it, what, Harvard?
Harvard. It's funny to me.
You said that better than me.
You know, the first week I was in Boston, I got on the subway and they said, next stop, Harvard. And I was like, Harvard? Wait, it's one of the best universities in the world. Harvard, people. But yes, it is a very different accent in a very different place, but it's a great city. I love Boston.
And it's not bad. You're going to, Canadian viewers are going to love it because you love hockey.
I do.
You actually play hockey, right?
I do. I started playing hockey growing up in Rochester. I went to a Rochester Americans hockey game and just fell in love with the game, and I played in high school, and then now I just play recreational. And in Boston, there's hockey everywhere. Everybody loves it, so it's a great place.
So it's more like pickup hockey now?
Yeah, now it's more pickup for fun.
And what position do you play?
So I spent most of my time as a defenseman, but I've recently moved up to center, to forward, which is pretty good. I like that because I get to use my defensive and offensive skills.
There you go. and you really have a heart for students, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Particularly students at, well, in Boston, you're going to have quite a few Ivy League schools
Absolutely.
that you minister on campus, and you have a really big heart for this generation of students. Tell us how you got there. Like, how did you end up just saying, you know what, at this time in my life, I want to work with students?
Sure. Well, I went to the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics and studied apologetics there and graduated. And after I finished, RZM was thinking, how can we incorporate these graduates into the ministry in some way and use them in evangelism? And so I was one of the ones that they selected, and they noticed that Boston is a very good place to send an evangelist because people in Boston are very hostile to hearing the word God or any mention of God. And so that is basically how I ended up in Boston around a vast majority of university students. They say the ratio is somewhere around one out of every 4 students or 1 out of every 4 people in Boston is a university student.
Wow.
So it's a very high ratio of people that are students.
And particularly in the Northeast, people are, I think, generally seen to be more spiritually resistant. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, it really has. And I guess I feel that people have a bunch of different reasons as to why that is.
Right.
Oftentimes people have been hurt by the church. Some people have had just bad experiences. They've had a family member that maybe has said something. Oftentimes people have a misconception about what Christianity is, and they really just feel like Christianity is a bunch of fairy tales.
Right.
And so when you mention God, they have this image of a God that you aren't even thinking of, but they in turn see that image of God as being someone that they wouldn't want. We don't want to deal with him. And I don't blame them because I really wouldn't want that God either. And so a lot of what I do is to say, I recognize that this is what you may have seen on TV, or this may be an experience of what you have. But what if I could talk to you about what he truly is like? And I think that that's kind of the shift that I focus on, because you're right. Once you mention God, it seems like the walls go up and they say, oh, that's great. And they want to change the subject and talk about something else.
So what are some points of resistance you're encountering with students today?
I think some of the biggest points of resistance are, they say to me, there's no evidence for this.
Okay.
This Christianity thing, you guys haven't done any research, you are ignoring science, you are ignoring philosophy, you are ignoring common sense, and you are living for this book that was written 2,000 years ago. And
I've heard that.
So the biggest resistance is there is nothing concrete to this. And I say to him, well, thank you for sharing that with me, but I actually think that there is something concrete to this. You know, and then I begin to unpack why we can trust the Bible, or why belief in God makes sense of everything we see around us, or how we know there's evidence for the resurrection, and how Jesus meets the deepest needs of each one of us. And then we start to see, wow, maybe there is a comprehensive, grounded worldview that Christianity can present. And so I think that's oftentimes the approach that I take when people just seem very, this is just not for me. And because I go to such a great school, and because I, have come from a great home, exactly. This is so common sense for me. And they say, so you, Alycia, if you were just a little bit smarter, maybe you would understand what I'm saying. And so really the way I combat that is just to say, well, let's talk about it. And then we end up getting in great conversations, and people are willing to talk about it.
So it's a conversation rather than a confrontation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let me ask you back to students for a second, because this is a fascinating and a niche ministry too, to actually be at like places like Harvard and Yale and so on in the Northeast. Really interesting group of student body. There's probably like a top 2 or 3 objections that show up on a regular basis. What do you hear consistently from students in their 20s?
Consistently, I hear a lot about God of the Old Testament. So isn't God of the Old Testament a moral monster, and God of the New Testament is the God of love? So it seems to be like this dichotomy between the two gods of the Bible, in a sense, or personalities of God. I think a second question I get asked is, well, what about the people in the rainforest? Or what about people in remote places where have no access to Christianity? And you're telling me that God will send them to hell. And so essentially what these questions are, these are questions that people ask me trying to understand the character and the nature of God. You know, if God seems like a monster over here, how does he seem loving over here? In other words, how can I deal with his character? How do I know I can trust him?
So what do you say to that?
Well, that is
in 30 seconds or less. What do you say?
You know, I think the very short condensed version is what I do is I talk about what some of the situations were in the Old Testament. And what you see in the Old Testament is you see people who are committing acts that really we would have an issue with, including child sacrifice, burning a child while alive in front of many, many, many people as part of a sacrifice. Now, for me, as a person living in this day and age, if I saw a child being sacrificed, wouldn't I intervene? Wouldn't I do the same thing? Which I don't even know if I have any friends who wouldn't intervene. And I think sometimes what I do is I try to help people to understand the bigger picture. People usually hear, oh, God did this, but they never looked at the context. And they didn't take the time to actually look at what is actually being said here. And so what I do is I kind of try to help people to understand the context and understand. So really, God is no different between the two. Justice is carried out in the Old Testament, and it is swift and it's on people. Justice is carried out in the New Testament, but it's on God himself that he takes it. So justice is consistent throughout, love is consistent throughout, but in the New Testament, Jesus is the final lamb, the final sacrifice for justice.
And for the record, I'm not sure that God ever sanctioned. I mean, the Israelites were told to oppose child sacrifice in the Old Testament, which is good. Okay, that's really fascinating, you know. So you phrase it in a bigger context. And I think a lot of us freeze in moments like that, and we're like, I don't know either.
Yeah.
I skip over those chapters. Right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and you know, I think all of us have been there where we're like, oh, don't ask me that question because I don't know. But it's a continual process, and you continue to learn, and you go back, and then you have an answer next time.
That's great. Anything else you've picked up in terms of dealing with students today? Because I'm sure a lot of us have like relatives or friends or kids or that neighbor next door that we're trying to build into who seems just a little bit resistant. Tips.
Tips to reach people, yes, absolutely. Well, understand that, I would say number one, understand that people have legitimate reasons to sometimes be resistant to God. Not everybody does, but there are genuine reasons that people have to be resistant that stem from previous pains or previous interactions. So I think we just need to keep that in mind. I think number two, one thing I really encourage people to do is let people see Jesus before you talk about him. Are we really demonstrating Christ to people? One of my favorite verses is Matthew 5:16. Let your light shine before men, that they would see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Are people seeing your light so that God is glorified through the good things that you do? Your neighbor that's elderly and can't mow her lawn, are you the one over there helping her out? Or the other neighbor who's sick or just had a recent loss or somebody died in their family, are you cooking meals for them? Are you helping them? Are you there just to cry? I think once we demonstrate Christ, people are more willing to listen about him, about who he is. And I think sometimes we get so focused on, I have to learn all these things in order for me to talk and share the gospel with people. And really, what God asks us to do is represent Christ well in so many different areas of our life. Reflect him, show him, and be his hands and feet. And then when it comes time for the gospel, when God opens up those doors, you can then walk into it, and people already have an idea of who he is because of what they've seen in you.
Wow. Alycia, this has been refreshing, really refreshing.
You.
I think you helped quite a few people today.
Hopefully.
And be encouraged in the work that you're doing in Boston at some, you're planting some seeds that'll last a lifetime.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest has been Alycia Wood, and she is with the Ravi Zacharias International School of Ministry and a speaker with them. Thanks so much.